Hello friends, and welcome to the Art War, a place where creativity and inclusivity converge. Today we're going to be starting the process of preparing ourselves for the journey ahead, and like any good adventure, there's going to be three things that we need. A training montage, a plan of action, and of course, the necessary gear to outfit ourselves with. First up on that list is the training arc, but wait, if our adventure itself is supposed to be a journey of learning, how do we train for the training? Though it might seem counterintuitive at first, it's for that very same reason that it's imperative for us to not only understand, but also to reevaluate the processes involved with learning in order for us to get the most out of our artistic journey. Because of this, we'll first be taking a look at some of the general concepts of how we learn so that we can better apply them to not just art, but any topic that you're interested in studying. We'll then move on to explore some more specific methodologies appropriate to our chosen pursuit of art. But before we do, I'd like to invite you to continue following me on this journey by hitting the like and subscribe buttons down below. And while you're at it, why not hit notifications so that you can stay posted on all the content going further on this channel. Luckily for us, there's already a number of quality resources out there on the topic, and in particular, one of my favorite content creators on the subject of learning, Marc Brunet, has an excellent video entitled Science of Learning Art Faster, which will serve as a good foundation for our discussion here today. I won't be going over all of the topics he discussed, and I highly suggest that you check out the video for yourselves, but one of the key points that he brings up is this concept of focus. You see, one of the first reactions the brain has to learning something new is stress, which is an experience that I think we all are familiar with. Equally so, however, is the sense of accomplishment that we get when we finally understand the material at hand. That good feeling we get is the brain's reward system at play, giving us a proverbial pat on the back for being able to overcome our initial struggles and accomplish our goals. That dedicated mental energy that is required of us to overcome that initial barrier of stress is what Marc denotes as focus. A quantifiable representation of one's ability to focus can be thought of as the difference between the stress of learning something new and the reward response that we get for actually pulling through. With this representation, it's quite easy to see that one's ability to focus and learn is a limited resource, and that it can be affected by one of two variables. As the stress we feel in one circumstance rises, or the enjoyment that we get from fulfilling that activity decreases, our ability to focus on that endeavor likewise diminishes. If the stress in any circumstance ever outweighs the reward system, then we lose our ability to focus and we give up. An interesting thing to note is that I've noticed a number of different creators expressing similar outlooks on the topic, albeit with different names, such as Sinix in their video entitled Advice for Starting Your Art Journey, where they talk about one's passion in a similar vein to what we've already discussed, as being the driving force that propels one through the adversities they may face upon learning new things during their artistic journey. Another viewpoint on the matter is a video entitled The Cost of Willpower by Psychro, where instead of talking about a stress and a reward response, they instead explore the counterplay between willpower and enjoyment. The conclusions that they draw are similar to what we've already discussed again, with willpower being attributed to one's ability to push through the things that they don't enjoy, whereas enjoyment is the reward that they get out of those experiences. And they warn that should ever willpower be higher than the enjoyment that one gets out of their activities, that it will be a road to burnout, and you'll inevitably quit whatever it is that you're doing or progress much slower than other people who are actually enjoying the process. What all of these videos have in common is this notion that our ability to learn is a limited resource if not managed properly. However, there are multiple factors that play into it that we are able to influence and control. For our purposes here, we're going to be referring to the negative attribute as stress and the positive one as enjoyment. Our goal then is going to be to reduce the amount of stress that we experience from learning and maximize the amount of enjoyment that we get out of the process. So, how do we do that? First, let's take a look at how we can decrease the stress we experience from the learning process. And I think it's important to, first of all, acknowledge the fact that it's perfectly normal to have a stress response when trying to learn something new. The fact that we respond this way should be no indication of your ability to actually absorb the material or reflect negatively upon you at all. The good news is that this stress response is always strongest in the beginning and it diminishes over time, though it never disappears entirely. But that does give us insight into our first strategy for combating it, which is to set small, manageable goals for ourselves. You see, while the stress response we experience may decrease over time, our reward system actually increases the more that we're able to successfully learn to compensate. This is why it's important for us to build on our successes over time so that the stress response will never outpace our reward system. Done properly, this is a self-fueling cycle that will help prevent us from being discouraged along the way and thus lead to rapid growth. The second tip is to simply respect the fact that our focus is a limited resource and acknowledge that many of the things that we do throughout the day are capable of diminishing its reserve. I know I, for one, have personally fallen into the trap of trying to distract myself through various mediums as a way of de-stressing before taking on a particular task, only to return to it later and find that my resolve to undertake this endeavor has greatly diminished and it's much harder to get started than what it would have been initially. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't take breaks or try to de-stress from time to time, only that it's important for us to acknowledge that there's a real cost to do so in the manners that we're typically familiar with, and that instead, if our goal is to try and prepare ourselves for an arduous task in front of us, that it would be better to learn how to defocus during those times of respite so that we're not depleting our precious reserves of focus for the day. One way of accomplishing this is through the practice of mindfulness, which is a state of purposely bringing oneself fully into the moment without the distraction of outside thoughts or worries. Like many of the things we've already discussed here today, this at its core is simply an exercise in awareness, of being able to calmly acknowledge and accept the things that are burdening us without evaluation, so that we are able to more clearly focus on the things that we want to accomplish. A common tool in learning how to achieve this state of mindfulness is the practice of meditation, which I know probably seems daunting or unappealing to some of you out there, but I would encourage you to abandon any preconceptions that you have on the matter before at least giving it a try, at least once. It only takes a couple of minutes to go through the process, and to my great surprise is actually a fairly prevalent exercise in many of the older books that I find when perusing a used bookstore. Most of the time, this exercise is presented as a way of improving one's observation skills or as a warm-up to beginning an extended period of drawing, such is the case in the book The Magic of Drawing by Cliff Wright, where he advocates for using a similar method before doing any sort of drawing. For those of you who have never tried meditation before, I would like to read you an excerpt from his book, detailing the steps of the exercise so that you can try it for yourself at home and see if it's something that might be beneficial to you. So, without further ado, let's get started. Sense exercise, 2 minutes. This exercise is probably the most important in the whole book. Make it your passion to do it before every drawing session and every time you find your mind wandering. With continued practice, you'll be amazed at the difference it will create in your attention, creativity, and quality of drawing. Sit upright in your chair so that both feet are on the ground, legs uncrossed and hands resting in your lap. Close your eyes and bring your attention to the feeling of your body in the chair and your feet on the ground. Be aware of any tension and allow it to fall away. Rest for a few moments and be aware of where your thoughts are. Turn your full attention to the feeling of the air across your face and allow yourself to experience the subtlety of that feeling. If you notice that your thoughts are wandering, return your attention to the air on your face. Shift attention now to your sense of smell and fully absorb all the scents that surround you. Notice that the breath passing in through your nostrils is cooler than that which passes out. Finally, bring your full attention to listening. First, hear the sounds within the room without judging or naming them. Gradually, allow your listening to extend outside the immediate room, encompassing every sound that you hear, even the most distant and gentle. Let those sounds simply rise and fall from the silence where they originate. Rest for a few moments just listening. Listen deeply. Bring yourself back by gently opening your eyes and resting attention on your vision. Allow the forms and colors to come to you rather than thinking about seeing them. You're now ready to draw. Well, I hope that experience was an insightful one at the very least, but moving on from there, we're going to be taking a look at the other side of the equation and looking at ways that we can perhaps increase the amount of joy that we get out of the reward response of learning. To start things off, I would like to first reiterate one of the points that we've already discussed, since it packs a bit of a 1-2 punch in being able to both decrease the stress we get from the learning response, while also increasing the reward response we get in turn. And that is the importance of building on our previous successes over time by setting small, manageable goals that are easy for us to achieve in order to fuel that self-fulfilling cycle that we've already discussed. The second suggestion echoes the sentiments of our mindfulness exercise by reframing one's focus to be not on the problems and setbacks that we face along our journey, but instead on the successes, however small, that we're able to achieve along the way. The last suggestion might seem a bit obvious to be considered real advice at first, but it's simply to just focus on the things that you enjoy doing. I'm sure we've all experienced how difficult and downright exhausting it can be to study for a subject in which we find very little joy. And yet, when the topic changes to one in which we share great interest, the information comes much more readily and seems to stay longer in our minds. As this applies to drawing, it's simply to practice drawing the things that interest us. In both the original video by Sinix, which we have already brought up, and in another one by Psychra, entitled How Practice May Be Killing Your Joy, this topic is explored in much deeper detail. Of particular note, in Psychra's video, he introduces a method of learning that is vastly different from the traditional approach of learning the art fundamentals from the ground up and doing art studies before moving on to finished pieces, in favor of diving straight into just drawing whatever it is that you're passionate about and solving the problems along the way as they arise. Though I personally feel a bit more comfortable with a more structured approach to learning, I can definitely see the merits of what Psychra is mentioning, and I highly suggest that you check out his video and form your own opinions on the matter. That being said, I do plan on taking the methodologies introduced in both of these videos and sort of combining them in a hybridization of methodologies, sticking to a bit more of a structured approach to learning the fundamentals, while also being mindful of the source materials and references that I use to be things that I personally find interesting. An example of this is that I'm quite a big fan of Star Wars, and, well, lightsabers and starships are at their core just a combination of basic forms and perspective, so when it comes to studying those particular fundamentals, I reckon I'm going to be drawing quite a lot of those particular subjects. Additionally, I'm going to be sure to tackle some more ambitious projects outside of the scope of regular studies as a way of familiarizing myself with what I still need to learn and getting a head start on topics that have yet to be introduced on the channel. Hopefully, with these strategies under our belt, we'll be able to make the most out of our time practicing and absorb the most information that we can. Speaking of which, before we move on to discussing ways in which we can use our time more efficiently, let's go over a quick recap of the main points that we've discussed. First is the acknowledgement that our focus is a limited resource and must be respected as such. Additionally, it can be thought of as the difference between the initial stress response we get upon trying to learn something and the inevitable enjoyment that we get upon succeeding. Thus, our goals are going to be to limit the amount of stress we get and increase the amount of enjoyment. In order to achieve this, we'll be focusing on setting small, achievable goals for ourselves so that we can build up our success over time. Additionally, we'll be practicing mindfulness as a way of lessening the stress we get from trying to overcome that initial barrier of learning. Finally, we'll be seeking to raise our levels of enjoyment throughout the process by focusing on subject matters that we personally find interesting. Diving right into things, we're going to get one of the most major concepts out of the way first, and that is, learning is a curve with diminishing returns. When we first start learning a skill, the amount of progress that we can make is quite staggering, actually, but very quickly we run into an issue of experiencing fewer and fewer returns for the time that we spend. If we took the time to fully master a skill, it would be quite limiting in what we can accomplish. However, by simply taking the necessary amount of effort to reach this turning point, we can extract the most benefit out of our time. This is related to what's known as the Pareto principle, which states that for many outcomes, roughly 80% of the consequences comes from 20% of the causes. That wording may seem a bit abstract, but applying it to our curve that we saw earlier, that implies that we can master 80% of a skill by only learning about 20% of its material. An outlandish claim to be sure upon first inspection, but if you take the time to dive a little deeper and investigate it further, it starts to make a surprising amount of sense. Let's take the humble Rubik's Cube as an example. Now, there are over 43 quintillion possible states for a seemingly simple object to have, and yet I don't need to know every 43 million of those permutations to be able to solve the cube. In fact, I only need to know a very small subset of those, a couple of patterns, and a few instructions on how to move between them in order to solve the cube in its completion. Now, I won't be setting any speed records for solving the cube by learning just the basic procedures of how to do so. That would take much more practice, figuring out some nuances and refining the technique over an extended period of time, but those basic procedures are enough to get the cube done. And it doesn't take much time to learn those simple procedures and concepts to get the cube solved. Borrowing another video of Marc's, though he does have a more recent one on the topic, I personally find that an older one of his entitled The 10,000 Hour Rule and Why It's Wrong does a much better job of showing the concepts of the Pareto principle at work. In it, Marc tackles the commonly held adage that it takes 10,000 hours to master a skill, and attempts to dispel any discouragement that may come from that realization by providing the original context of the studies that developed it. The short of it is that those 10,000 hours are what is needed to reach a level of true mastery in a subject, meaning that there's very little left to learn and that you'd be comfortable practically doing anything in that field that you could think of. As this applies to art, we simply don't need to have that level of mastery in drawing every subject matter that we come across. We can focus more on the things that we want to draw and the things that interest us. If you don't plan on drawing fish, for example, why bother studying the anatomy of them? Having simple skills of observation and form will be enough for those rare occasions where you have a need to represent them in a particular art piece. Additionally, Marc makes two other great points that are worth discussing. The first being that what we normally think of as a skill is, in fact, a skill set. The example he gives is that of trying to draw a building, which involves first knowing how to properly draw a 3D cube in space, followed by being able to apply the correct perspective for it to look right on the canvas, and thirdly, the actual design principles involved in the aesthetics of whatever architecture you're going for. Each one of those steps is in of itself a skill that can be practiced and, once acquired, can be readily applied to other subject matter that needs it in order to be drawn, thus greatly limiting the amount of time that you need to master, say, drawing a building in an Art Deco style versus a Gothic. The second point he makes is that the practice we commit to learning these skills needs to be dedicated practice and not passive. What this means is that one simply can't mindlessly repeat an exercise or draw something over and over again without properly evaluating and critiquing what it is that they're doing. Sure, you'll make some progress over time as you retain small bits of information here or there, but by properly dedicating your focus to what you're doing, we're able to greatly diminish the amount of time that it takes to acquire a particular skill. And there's that word again, focus. This point reinforces the importance of us being able to maximize our focus reserves, like we've already discussed in this video, by providing a bit of context for what it is we're hoping to achieve. Keeping these concepts in mind will also help us to stay motivated through our journey, as being able to acquire just that first 20% of a skill before moving on will lead to us experiencing rapid growth in our development, and that success will just keep playing upon itself and further raising our reward system. If at some point along the way we find that 20% we developed isn't enough to accomplish what we want, it's much easier to then come back at a later time and develop on what we've already learned than it is to start from scratch. In conclusion, the main things we need to keep in mind in order to use our time efficiently is that learning is a curve with diminishing returns, so it's much more important to get that first 20% in than it is to fully master a skill before moving on. Secondly is the acknowledgement that what we typically think of as a skill is in fact a skill set composed of many individual skills, each of which can be practiced on its own and applied to things that we learn further down the road. Additionally, the practice that we commit to learning these skills needs to be dedicated practice and not passive. Lastly, we don't need to learn all of these skills in order to be satisfied with our proficiency. Instead, we can focus on the fundamentals and skills needed to draw the things that we want to draw. And with that, we should have a fairly solid foundation to base the rest of what we're going to be learning off of. I hope that you found some of the tips in this video helpful and can apply them to whatever it is that you're hoping to achieve. With the training arc concluded, we can now take what we've learned here today and use it to formulate a plan for exactly how we're going to proceed on this adventure before us. But that's a topic for next week's video. If you don't want to miss it, be sure to do the usual YouTube things down below, and while you're at it, why not leave a comment discussing any difficulties you've had with studying in the past and whether or not the topics we've talked about here today would have helped you at all. I look forward to seeing what you all think and hope to see you in the next video. But regardless, farewell on your journeys, wherever they may take you, and hopefully, I'll see you soon.